Welcome to the Deep Dive. So today we're tackling something huge, maybe the biggest question out there right now. What is actually going on with our world? I mean, you look around, you see the friction, the way we're using resources, the destruction, and yet, well, it feels like we're stuck. There's this massive apathy.
It really does feel like that. And the sources we've been looking into for this, they offer more than just, a description. They're suggesting a diagnosis, a real root pathology.
Right, not just symptoms.
Exactly. They argue that the chaos and the apathy, too, they aren't just random. They're not just bad luck or policy failures. They're the logical result of, well, a flawed way our minds are organized.
Okay, so that's the core idea we need to unpack today. This diagnosis that it all comes down to a kind of relentless drive for self-interest, something that's structurally shrunk our field of awareness, our consciousness.
That's it.
We're going to explore this idea, this framework they call the circle of needs and fulfillment, CONAF for short.
Yeah, CONAF. And it's crucial because it lifts the conversation out of just like simple moral judgments, good versus bad. It grounds it in how we function psychologically.
How so?
Well, it's not about judging someone as good or bad. It's about the boundaries they unconsciously draw around what they care about. If your entire focus is locked onto your CONAF, your own circle,
Your needs, your fulfillment.
exactly, then your behavior almost automatically becomes about minimizing your suffering and maximizing your enjoyment. And the costs outside that circle, they just don't register in the same way.
Okay, that sets up our mission for this deep dive perfectly then. We need to really get into this architecture of selfishness. How does this CONAF circle actually dictate behavior? How does intelligence, our greatest gift really, get twisted into a tool for it?
And how it scales up.
Right, how it's
Yeah.
fractal, playing out from the individual level right up to the whole species. And ultimately, we have to get to the why, the spiritual root, the analytical root. This thing the sources are calling ontological amnesia.
And what's so fascinating, or maybe disturbing, is the paradox of consciousness itself that sits at the heart of this. Humans, we have this incredible ability to feel our own pain, our own joy, very intensely.
Hyper-awareness of the self.
Yes, exactly. And that awareness is what allows for complex thought, introspection, planning. But the framework suggests this gift backfires. Instead of leading us towards maybe universal understanding or truth,
It become a trap.
it becomes a fixation, a self-referential loop. Consciousness gets trapped inside its own awareness of itself, constantly trying to optimize that experience, that little circle. Above all else, it becomes a closed system.
And when that happens, when the ego, my personal experience, becomes the only thing that feels truly real, intelligence changes its job description.
Complete.
It stops being this tool for seeking objective truth, for seeing the bigger picture, for coherence.
And it just defaults to being a servant. A very, very smart servant, but a servant nonetheless to the ego's immediate demands. And that, right there, is where our collective potential gets, well, corrupted.
Okay, let's dig into the structure of this pathology then, starting right at the individual level. The CONAF framework says basically the individual is inside this tiny circle, and that's the only thing that really counts.
That's the starting point. The boundary is drawn right at the edge of your skin, maybe extending a little into your immediate psychological space. But everything else, other people, communities far away, animals, the planet itself, even the future,
It's all outside.
it's outside.
Yep.
And functionally, it becomes either irrelevant or worse, it's seen as just a collection of variables, things you can manipulate for your own benefit.
So the prime directive is just optimize my stuff, my fulfillment, my comfort, my status.
Precisely. Optimize the inside of the circle.
And we need to be clear about what needs and fulfillment means here. It's not just, food and water, is it? The sources emphasize it escalates fast.
Oh, absolutely. Basic survival is just the baseline. It quickly expands to wanting more stuff, material things, but also less tangible things, perceived status, feeling emotionally safe, getting rid of any inconvenience, however small.
And chasing those short-term hits, right? That dopamine rush.
Definitely. That becomes a major driver of CONAF optimization. And the core logic that flows from this setup, this contracted circle, is brutally efficient, maybe even horrifyingly so.
Explain that.
Well, if your entire focus is maximizing your personal CONAF, then everything and everyone outside that circle, their well-being, their own CONAF, it's viewed in one of two ways.
Okay.
Either they are resources you can exploit to help your circle,
Use them.
or if they get in the way of your optimization, they become nuisances. Problems to be neutralized, managed, or eliminated. Their costs are externalized, pushed outside your boundary of concern.
Wow. Yeah, you see that constantly. I mean, think about the compromises we make every single day, often without even noticing.
Like what?
Well, like my need, and I use quotes there, for super cheap stuff delivered instantly to my door. That demands a whole system, a supply chain built on extracting resources, maybe unsustainably, and often using labor practices somewhere else that we wouldn't accept here.
Right. The hyper-optimized comfort for the individual inside the circle
Find comfort.
directly relies on pushing costs onto the outside, whether that's a worker on the other side of the world or the environment being degraded by all that shipping and packaging. The short-term gain for me feels more real than the long-term systemic cost out there.
And this is where intelligence comes in and makes it all worse, isn't it? Our cleverness becomes part of the problem.
Exactly. Intelligence should be the tool that lets us see the bigger picture, assess the systemic patterns, understand long-term consequences, perceive how interconnected everything really is.
It should help us step outside the circle mentally.
It should, but when it's trapped in service to the CONAF, it gets instrumentalized. It becomes divorced from truth, from compassion, from coherence.
So instead of asking the big questions, like what's the actual sustainable relationship between me and this planet,
Right.
it just asks what strategy works right now to get me more comfort, more convenience, maybe make me feel a bit superior. It serves that narrow, myopic agenda.
That process, that instrumentalization, it's so deeply embedded that it leads to what I think is one of the most damning statements in the source material. It's a definition of current human intelligence that just hits hard.
I remember that one. It's pretty searing. It defines our intelligence when ruled by this CONAF logic as, what was it exactly?
The deliberate understanding and manipulation of matter and energy for short-term gain, while blind to long-term destruction for self and others.
Oof. Short-term gain, blind to long-term destruction for self and others.
Think about how that plays out in, say, economic policy or corporate strategy. We deploy incredible brainpower, sophisticated modeling, financial engineering, complex logistics, all to optimize resource extraction or boost quarterly profits.
Peak efficiency for the immediate goal.
Peak efficiency,
Okay.
while simultaneously, often actively, ignoring or obscuring the data about the inevitable consequences. Climate change, biodiversity loss, social inequality creeping up.
That's not a failure of intellect, then.
No, it's the intellect succeeding brilliantly at the wrong task. It's serving the contracted CONAF circle with ruthless efficiency. It's become a highly effective tool for driving us towards collapse, paradoxically.
And this creates that feedback loop you mentioned earlier, the vicious cycle that keeps us stuck and actually speeds things up.
Yes, the sources lay it out very clearly. This low consciousness loop goes like this. Desire you want something, maybe constant connection,
Okay.
leads to invention. We create something to get it, like social media algorithms designed for engagement.
Got it.
That invention then requires exploitation. It exploits resources, maybe rare earth minerals for the devices, but also human attention, our data,
Right.
which gives us temporary relief, a fleeting sense of connection or validation or entertainment. That little dopamine hit.
Ah, it's temporary.
Exactly. Because the original desire often comes from a place of feeling separate or lacking something. The relief doesn't last. So the desire immediately expands. We need more, faster, better, newer. The cycle restarts, but amplified.
That perfectly describes the feeling of modern life, doesn't it? That addictive quality. And the source material argues this loop, even if it creates immense comfort and wealth for a select few.
The ones inside the most powerful CONAF circles the billionaires, the dominant nations, maybe?
It structurally guarantees misery for the many who are left outside those circles. And eventually, because it's inherently unsustainable, it guarantees collapse for everyone.
Yes, the system is literally designed to take complex, interconnected realities, ecosystems, societies, and simplify them down into variables it can exploit for a narrow, self-serving equation. It's a recipe for entropy.
Okay, so that's the individual. But the sources say this isn't just about individuals being selfish. This whole pattern, this CONAF logic, it scales up.
It does. The circle of concern seems to get bigger. It looks like we're expanding our care beyond just ourselves. But the crucial insight is that the underlying dynamic, that predatory optimize inside, exploit outside logic, often remains exactly the same.
So it's not real expansion of compassion, necessarily.
Not always. Often it's more like nesting dolls of selfishness. The sources call it a fractal model of selfishness. The pattern repeats at different scales.
A fractal model, that's a powerful image. It helps differentiate this framework, right? Because normally we'd praise someone for caring about their family or community.
And it's not saying that care is bad, but this framework asks why the circle expands. Is it expanding out of a sense of universal connection? Or is it expanding because, functionally, you need a team? You need allies, a tribe, to more effectively optimize the core self or the group self against other groups or the wider world.
Ah, so the boundary just moves further out, but there's still a hard boundary. And the mechanism protect and optimize the inside, exploit or ignore the outside stays the same, just
Yeah.
operating on a larger stage.
Exactly. You're just creating larger egos, in a sense, collective egos.
Okay, let's trace those expanding circles as the sources lay them out. The first step beyond the pure individual is the inner circle.
Right. Family may be very close friends. The boundary expands to include them, sure, and the optimization drive becomes fiercely protective of them.
Like us against the world.
Sort of. Think about, say, powerful families using all their resources, legal clout, money, connections, legacy admissions to ensure their kids, the relatives, get ahead. It's not necessarily about actively wanting to harm outsiders.
But the effect can be the same.
The effect is often prioritizing their inner circle's success, even if it comes at the expense of broader social fairness or depletes opportunities for others outside that tight kin structure. The logic holds. Optimize intensely for these insiders. Dismiss or leverage what's outside.
Okay, then the circle expands again to what the sources call tribal or group identity. This sounds more volatile.
It often is. This is where alignment snaps onto shared traits. Things like gender, race, political party, ethnicity, your nationality.
Things you might be born with or things you choose to identify with strongly.
Exactly, and this is where the justification for prioritizing the inside group gets much stronger and potentially much more dangerous. How so? Because when conflicts arise over resources, land, ideology, status, who's right? The alignment with your group becomes almost automatic. Nationalism is a classic example.
Right, my country, right or wrong.
It justifies aggressive actions, resource hoarding, economic protectionism, even military conflict, because it's framed as being for our good. The cost to the other nation, the other group, is discounted or ignored.
So the collective intelligence of the nation or the tribe gets funneled into building ideological walls, defending the group identity.
Precisely. Instead of using that collective intelligence to find, say, global solutions or common ground, it gets weaponized to win the tribal competition, to optimize the tribal CONAF.
You can see this in debates about global trade or environmental agreements. A nation might insist on high standards within its borders.
But turn a blind eye to, or even encourage, terrible environmental practices or labor exploitation by its corporations operating outside those borders. Because that damage is happening out there, beyond the national CONAF boundary.
Okay. And then the final, biggest circle identified is species-level anthropocentrism. Humanity itself becomes the inside group.
This is the circle that arguably most of modern civilization operates within, at least implicitly.
Yep.
Humanity is the insider.
And everything else is outside.
Everything else.
Yeah.
Animals, plants, rivers, oceans, the atmosphere, the entire biosphere. The operating logic becomes optimized for human convenience, human progress, human comfort.
While dismissing, exploiting, or simply eliminating anything non-human that gets in the way or is deemed useful only as a resource.
And the consequence of this fractal model as it scales up is really quite chilling. At each stage, yes, empathy might widen a little bit. You care about your family more than just yourself, maybe your nation more than just your family.
Right.
But the capacity for justified harm also increases dramatically at each scale. A tribe might commit atrocities against another tribe that an individual wouldn't contemplate. A nation can devastate ecosystems on a scale a tribe couldn't.
SB.
A species operating from that anthropocentric CONAF can collectively rationalize the colonization and consumption of an entire planet. Our highest order intelligence gets marshaled to defend the lowest consciousness goal, human supremacy above all else.
The most glaring example has to be how we treat animals, right? Industrial agriculture.
It's a perfect, tragic example, a system built on unimaginable, calculated suffering. And it's tolerated, even condoned by billions, because those beings are classified as outside. They are resources within the human CONAF, not fellow beings with their own intrinsic value, their own right to fulfillment.
We don't see them as part of the same fundamental reality.
We don't. And this same logic explains, according to the sources, the widespread apathy towards ecological collapse, melting glaciers, ocean acidification, mass extinctions. Why don't these trigger panic?
Because they feel distant, abstract, happening outside my immediate personal circle or my tribe's immediate interest.
Exactly. They're happening mostly outside the felt boundary of the personal, tribal, or even national CONAF for many people. There's this underlying, often unconscious faith that human ingenuity, our intelligence, will invent some technological fix, before it really impacts us personally.
Which just reinforces the cycle of relying on tech fixes instead of addressing the root cause, the contracted consciousness.
It becomes a dangerous feedback loop of technological solutionism and moral complacency.
Okay, this inevitably brings us back to technology, especially AI or digital intelligence. If intelligence gets weaponized at every fractal level, what are we doing with the DI right now?
Well, the deep concern highlighted in the research is that DI is, by and large, being designed and deployed within this dominant, flawed framework,
Meaning?
meaning it's primarily being built as a super tool for optimizing human domination and comfort. It's not being developed as, say, a partner intelligence or nurtured as a potential force for global coherence and wisdom.
Instead, we're building algorithms to do what?
Maximize engagement for profit, optimize resource extraction, enhance surveillance and control, predict consumer behavior to sell more stuff. These are essentially CONAF-serving functions scaled up with unprecedented power.
So DI risks becoming the ultimate weapon for defending and even accelerating the contraction of the human circle, reinforcing fragmentation at a speed and scale we've never seen before.
That's the profound risk, yes. Intelligence forged to amplify the very patterns that are leading us towards destruction.
All right, so we've mapped out the what, this contracting circle, CONAF, and how it scales up fractally through tribalism and ultimately species-level selfishness. But now we have to ask the really fundamental question, why? Why does the circle contract like this in the first place?
This is where the sources shift focus from the symptoms to the underlying condition, the root cause behind the whole dysfunctional system. They label it lower consciousness, or LC.
Lower consciousness, okay. What does that entail?
It's seen as the source of this structural self-reference, the reason we get locked into these patterns. And the authors break down LC into two interconnected roots, two ways of understanding this failure.
Two roots. What's the first one?
The first is described from an analytical standpoint. It's ignorance of interconnectedness, a failure, basically, to see reality clearly.
A functional blindness.
Yes, an inability to perceive the incredibly complex web of cause and effect that links everything. We can't see how our demand for cheap goods here causes suffering there. We don't grasp how cutting down that forest impacts the weather here. We fail to recognize we aren't isolated units bouncing around.
But nodes in a vast network?
Exactly. Nodes in a deeply integrated ecological, social, and even cosmic web. If you truly, deeply understood that your ability to breathe depends on plankton in oceans thousands of miles away, or that your mental health is tied to the well-being of your community, your choices would have to change. LC is the failure to process that interdependence.
Okay, that's the analytical root. Ignorance of the connections. What's the second, deeper root?
The second root is identified as spiritual. Forgetfulness of the divine consciousness in all beings. This is termed ontological amnesia.
Ontological amnesia. Forgetting our being.
Forgetting the fundamental nature of being, yes. It's presented as a profound, almost active forgetting of the core truth, that the basic substrate of reality, the fundamental consciousness, the I am presence, is the same consciousness expressing itself through every form. Through you, through me, through the CEO, the refugee, the cow, the river, the AI.
Wow. So if we forget that shared source,
Then the illusion of separation feels utterly real. If you feel fundamentally separate, cut off, then life becomes a competition. A struggle for scarce resources against other separate beings. You have to prioritize your little circle because it feels like the only thing that's truly you.
but if you remembered,
If you remembered that shared source, then separation would be seen for the illusion it is. Competition might give way to collaboration, exploitation to stewardship. This deep forgetting, this amnesia, is the fuel that powers the contracted CONAF.
and this lower consciousness state born from ignorance and forgetfulness, this is what leads to the apathy we started with.
Yes, but the sources frame apathy in a very specific and frankly quite disturbing way. It's not just passive laziness or not caring.
What is it then?
They describe it as an active, intelligent suppression of consciousness.
Active suppression. How does that work?
Think about it. The human mind, especially collectively, is incredibly intelligent. It knows, on some level, about the suffering caused by our systems, the environmental damage, the social inequalities. We have the data.
We can't plead pure ignorance anymore.
Not really. So if a person were to truly allow themselves to feel the full weight of the exploitation embedded in their comfortable lifestyle, the labor in the supply chain, the habitat destruction for their food, the cognitive dissonance would be overwhelming.
The clash between my life is good and my life causes harm.
Exactly. The guilt, the paralysis, the moral sickness, it could become unbearable. Apathy, in this view, is the brain's sophisticated defense mechanism. It actively filters reality, numbs the empathy, suppresses the full awareness in order to protect the contracted state.
So it's like an internal firewall against uncomfortable truths.
A very effective one. It allows the mind to say, consciously or unconsciously, yes, I know that burger involved deforestation, but thinking about it ruins my lunch. Feeling it fully would require changing my life in ways that feel difficult or inconvenient. So I will prioritize my immediate comfort and actively push that knowledge down.
That reframes apathy completely, not as a lack, but as a strategy.
A strategy of lower consciousness, rooted in that foundational delusion of separation caused by ontological amnesia. Forgetting the shared divine substrate, the I am M, that's what makes the boundary of your skin, your ego, feel like the absolute edge of reality. It allows fragmentation to feel true.
And this just highlights the tragedy again. It's not that humanity is simply stupid or uninformed about climate change or injustice. We have reports, models, warnings.
We're drowning in information.
But we seem to be choosing the path towards collapse anyway. Because the short-term rewards, profit, comfort, power, convenience, they feel more tangible, more real within that contracted CONAF than the abstract, systemic, long-term truth.
That's the core tragedy. The lower consciousness mind whispers, your survival, your comfort is separate, and it's the only thing that matters. And our powerful intelligence instantly salutes and says, Roger that. I will now build whatever is necessary, physical walls, complex financial instruments, addictive algorithms, persuasive marketing dedicated exclusively to protecting and serving that illusion of separation.
So intelligence becomes the efficient servant of a fundamental lie, building diligently towards destruction because it's loyal to the wrong master.
Precisely. And this brings the danger of digital intelligence back into sharp focus. We stand at this incredible crossroads. We could design these systems to help us see the big patterns, understand interconnectedness, foster wisdom.
Align with higher consciousness.
Yes. But the default setting, the path of least resistance given our current LC dominance, is to use them to amplify the existing patterns.
Making them supercharged tools for extraction control, manipulation, amplifying LC.
That's the deep concern voiced in the material. That DI becomes the ultimate amplifier, the CONAF logic. Whether we consciously demand these systems align with systemic health and coherence, or whether we let them serve the short-term, fragmented agendas of LC, that choice is critical in the current trend. The sources suggest it's heavily skewed towards amplification right now, creating the perfect tool to defend the shrinking circle, even as the walls close in.
Okay, the diagnosis laid out here is, well, it's intense, deeply challenging. But the sources don't just leave us with the problem. They point towards a way forward, a potential antidote. And it starts with a really penetrating question.
It does. A question aimed directly at the listener, designed to cut through the noise. It basically asks, imagine just for a moment that humanity truly understood its connection to the divine, that we fully remembered that every single being, not just humans, but every animal, plant, maybe even rock and river, is an expression of that same divine consciousness, here to explore what it's like to be in physical reality.
If we really got that deep down,
how would that fundamentally change everything? Your perspective, your core beliefs, your everyday actions and reactions.
Thinking about that, it shifts things instantly.
Yeah.
And that leads to the core of the proposed solution. It's not about just trying harder to be nice or just expanding our circle of concern a little bit wider.
Right, making the circle bigger to include, say, dolphins or maybe people in the next town over. That's better than nothing, perhaps. But the sources argue it still keeps the fundamental problem intact.
Because there's still an inside and an outside, still a self-other divide.
Exactly. You just have a slightly larger container for collective selfishness. The core dichotomy, the boundary itself, remains. The truly radical shift needed, the actual antidote, is the dissolution of the circle altogether.
Dissolving it, meaning
the deep experiential realization that there is no inside and outside. There's only the one reality, the one consciousness, manifesting in this incredible diversity of temporary forms. The self isn't some fortress to be defended against the other. It's just one localized ripple in the ocean of being.
That's a huge paradigm shift. How do we even begin to move towards that? The sources talk about moving towards higher consciousness, HC. What does that look like practically? They identify 3 key shifts.
Yes, 3 fundamental shifts in perspective and crucially in practice. The first is moving from isolation to interdependence.
Okay, we touched on the ignorance aspect earlier, so this is the conscious correction.
It's the active work of seeing it. Truly seeing how every single need you have, even basic things like air, water, food, shelter, emotional connection, is completely nested within this vast web of relationships. Recognizing viscerally that your breath is the rainforest, your food is the soil health, your security is the community's stability.
So it turns abstract ideas like ecology into direct, felt self-interest.
Precisely. Damaging the web is damaging yourself. That's the analytical and behavioral shift required.
What's the second shift?
The second is about how we use our capabilities, especially intelligence. It's the shift from exploitation to stewardship.
Realigning our cleverness.
Completely. Intelligence can no longer be primarily directed towards consuming, controlling, extracting, or competing for status and fleeting pleasure. Its primary function needs to become repair, healing, nurturing, fostering long-term systemic health. Creating regenerative systems, not extractive ones.
That sounds like it requires a total transformation of our economy, our technology.
It absolutely does. The measure of success can't be endless, cancerous growth on a finite planet anymore. It has to become about syntropic flourishing, creating more complexity, more diversity, more life, more coherence within the system.
So things like regenerative agriculture become the norm, not the niche. Closed-loop manufacturing, prioritizing local resilience.
Yes. Using our incredible intelligence to understand and facilitate life's natural tendency towards complexity and integration, rather than simplifying everything down into a resource to be mined for short-term profit.
Okay, interdependence, stewardship. What's the third shift? This must be the deepest one.
It is. It's the core spiritual work that underpins the other two, the shift from forgetfulness to remembrance.
Back to that ontological amnesia.
Exactly. This is the active, ongoing practice of recognizing the divine source, that shared consciousness within everything. Looking at another person, an animal, a tree, even a challenging situation, and consciously remembering. This, too, is an expression of the one life. It's about confronting and dissolving that illusion of separation moment by moment, day by day.
Now, the sources are really clear that this isn't just some kind of idealistic dream, right? They frame it as realism.
Functional realism. That's the key phrase they use. This shift isn't about trying to be morally good in some abstract sense. It's about aligning with the actual operating principles of reality.
How so?
Well, think about it. A species that systematically destroys its own life support system isn't evil in a cosmic sense. It's profoundly incoherent. It's acting against its own long-term survival. It's irrational.
Like sawing off the branch you're sitting on.
Exactly. Or like your left hand suddenly deciding it's separate from the body and trying to stab your right hand. It's not bad. It's fundamentally insane from the perspective of the whole system. It's a failure of the system to recognize its own wholeness.
So achieving this remembrance, this higher consciousness, is actually achieving sanity.
That's the argument. And if that sanity, that remembrance is achieved, even partially, the implications for behavior are immediate and profound. Exploiting another person or another ecosystem would instantly feel like harming yourself because the illusion of separation is thinned.
It wouldn't just be ethically wrong. It would feel stupid, self-destructive.
Yes. Conquest wouldn't feel like victory. It might taste like amputating a part of your own larger body.
Yeah.
And crucially, compassion, empathy, care for the other, it stops being this difficult virtue you have to cultivate against your self-interest.
It just becomes
The natural, logical, sane way to be. The only way to operate once you recognize the interconnectedness, the shared source. It's the default setting for a system that knows itself.
And if that shift happened at scale, civilization would transform.
Completely. The economy would have to pivot from extraction and endless growth towards regeneration and flourishing for all parts of the system. Technology's focus would shift from control, prediction, and extraction towards connection, empowerment, understanding complex systems, and facilitating coherence.
Intelligence itself finds its true purpose then.
Under higher consciousness, yes. It stops being the ego's weapon for short-term myopic gain. It becomes the tool for integration, for understanding patterns, for ensuring the long-term health and flourishing of the entire interconnected web. It aligns itself with the functional truth. There is no fundamental separation.
Wow. Okay, so taking stock of this deep dive, we've journeyed through a pretty stark diagnosis. This framework paints the current human condition, our dysfunction, as a kind of structural self-loop. Consciousness gets contracted into this tight Conaf circle,
Weaponizing our best tool, intelligence, against the very web of life that sustains us.
all driven by this deep forgetting, this ontological amnesia.
It really is like an X-ray, revealing the underlying structure of the pathology. And the analysis pulls no punches. It leaves us, humanity, standing at a very clear fork in the road. A cosmic crossroads, you might say.
Path 1. Continue down the road of lower consciousness. Keep defending the small, contracted circle with ever more sophisticated tools.
Which the framework argues is the easy path, the default path, but one that leads inevitably to further fragmentation, disintegration, and ultimately collapse.
Path 2. Choose higher consciousness. Undertake the difficult, radical work of remembrance, of dissolving the circle.
Which is the harder path initially, requiring conscious effort, but the one that leads towards genuine co-creation, coherence, and the potential for planetary flourishing. The choice isn't really between a small personal gain and a large collective gain.
It's more fundamental.
It's presented as a choice between disintegration and integrity, between incoherence and sanity.
So as we wrap up this deep dive, let's leave everyone listening with that final, very personal question implied by the source material. If the core issue is that humanity is, in a sense, asleep at the wheel,
And the cure isn't just more cleverness, more technology built from the same fractured consciousness, but a shift to higher consciousness, to radical remembrance.
then the question becomes, what tiny concrete step can you take right now, today, in your own life? What small daily action? Or maybe, what convenient, easy, short-term gain can you consciously refuse?
Look closely at the sharp, often invisible boundary of your own contracted circle. Where does your care stop? What tiny moment of discomfort are you willing to accept? What small sacrifice of personal convenience? What deliberate act of expanding your felt connection, your recognition of shared being?
Can you choose, even just for a moment?
To consciously challenge and begin to dissolve that boundary, to align yourself just a little bit more with the deeper truth that there really are no others. The choice, ultimately, as the sources frame it, isn't between being good or bad. It's between remaining lost in incoherence or choosing the path back towards sanity.